Because of a virus that attacked and hurt the world, we put much emphasis on washing our hands. But I'm here to tell you that there's a spiritual virus, and it is attacking marriages, families, and young adults, and it's called impurities. In 2020, the world asked us to wash our hands, but God is also calling us to have clean hearts.
The word purity means freedom from contamination. And in this book, we address things that contaminate our heart, such as lust, unforgiveness, bitterness, insecurities, idolatry, pornography, amongst other contaminations, and how to get free from them.
And that's exactly why we wrote this book, A Call to Purity, because God is calling us to be pure.
You see, when you walk in purity, you walk in freedom. And friends, this book is just not a book. It's a mandate from God, and God is calling us to rise up and walk in purity.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Let's Talk Purity podcast with Brittni and Richard De La Mora. You guys, we're so excited today. We are going to be talking about mental health, stay tuned because this is a battle that so many Christians are facing, and so we want to help you today. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Edifi.app, and if you want to connect with us, feel free to visit our website, lovealwaysministries.com. So today we have a very special guest. It's very funny because we share the same exact name. Her name's Brittni. My name's Brittni. So we're going to bring on our guest today. She is a mental health expert. She went to UCLA. She's doing incredible things to help Christians overcome their battle with mental health. And you guys are going to be blessed by this. So would you help me welcome Brittni? It is so good to have you today. Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Hi,
So happy
Britt.
to see your faces.
You have a new last name coming soon. What's good? You're
That's
going
a
for Brittni.
cool thing.
Yeah. Brittney Moses too.
Brittany Stoll.
Just Brittany Stoll. Okay. Because she is getting married soon. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so excited. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Let's Talk Purity podcast.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So many Christians battle with this issue with mental health. And so first I would love to know like how you got interested in this topic. I know you studied at UCLA. So if you could just share a little bit about like your history, and why you got into this mental health.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Because many of us who are in the world of faith and mental health, there's usually something personal that took place either in our lives or those that we love that made us go, okay, I need to dig into this a little more. So for me, I actually was like born and raised in the church. I served in ministry for years in the churches in LA, churches in Dallas, Texas when I was there, and predominantly served with youth and young adults. I also had a nonprofit ministry at the time, youth and young adult ministry. And so it was really around like, I had newly come to Christ on fire. It was really around like evangelism and community outreach and fellowship. And that was my vision for what I was doing. But what ended up happening time and time again is that I found myself consistently managing mental health crises with youth and young adults.
Wow.
Much more than I imagined. Now it makes total sense. Research for over 20 years has shown that when an individual's in psychological distress, they will turn to their church or their faith community before they ever step foot to a mental health professional.
Wow.
It really is a first line. So that's why I'm passionate about the church being equipped around this, because that's really where it's at. Mm-hmm. So, in my experience in ministry, honestly, just feeling a little hopeless and helpless because we were praying for folks, we were sitting with folks, we were doing all the things, but people were still deeply struggling and they weren't really finding solutions, they were struggling with the same issues we are currently. And you're like, these are people who I know love the Lord, who read the word, who do all the things, but they still are struggling deeply with their mental health. So I was like, okay, there's some more going on here. I had my own severe struggles with anxiety when I went through a turning point in my life where I had had a young divorce and became a newly single mom and was basically homeless for a time, trying to figure out where I was going to live and what I was going to do with my life. And I was experiencing real anxiety to the point where I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Like there were things happening in my body, regardless of what I believed in my faith. You know, there were things going on. And I'm like, and I was looking for resources that talked about both the like physical and psychological side, but also were like faith informed and faith based. And I just didn't see much out there that was actually bridging the gap. It was either like only spiritual resources or only like these secular scientific resources. Yeah. And as a person of faith who was interested in the inner workings of mental health and of the brain and body, I just wasn't seeing as much of an integration. So that led me to go back to school, got to go to UCLA, study psychology and do clinical research, do a thesis around childhood trauma and anxiety, and being able to serve in the community and facilitate support groups and whatnot. Now I get to content create around faith and mental health and wellness, and it's turned into more of like a public psychoeducation and awareness, especially in the church. But that's really kind of how things built up for me.
I love too what you're doing, because there's so many Christians that they just don't believe that you can be a Christian and be on fire for Jesus, yet battle with mental health. And so can you talk to that? Because I mean, Paul had a thorn in his side. We don't know what that thorn was, right? But it was still there. And it's like, I think sometimes Jesus allows us to walk with him through things because it keeps us humble, right? It keeps like, it reminds us of how desperately we need him. And so can you kind of talk to that area? Because there's a lot of shame around that. Like if, oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm battling with mental health, and people feel ashamed of that. Can you talk to them about that?
Yeah, Britt, I totally understand that. You know, I totally relate to that in my own experience. So a lot of it comes down to perspective. And this is one of the things that I like to mention the most, is that, you know, it comes down to our perspective of mental health. Like, what do we actually believe? So oftentimes you see two perspectives, right? You have the like 100% kind of secular view that's all based in like the psychology and research, but doesn't allude to any faith or God. It's just what's evidence-based, what treatments are proven to work. But however, there are things within that that can be helpful and effective and provide real practical solutions. Yeah. And then you have the 100% spiritual view, which is where we see it very heavily weighted in the church, which is this is 100% a spiritual matter. It's a 100% a spiritual root. And so therefore you need to do spiritual things in order to cure this. So that's when you get the whole, well, you're not having enough faith. You need to read more scripture. You just need to give it to God. Things that we actually call spiritual bypassing, because it's using spiritual language while invalidating the very real experiences and not offering any practical solutions. And so that's kind of the 100% spiritual view, but it sometimes doesn't take into account the practical side of what is evidentially going on in our brain and bodies. Yeah. That is a real lived experience. Yeah. And so what I think those of us who are really passionate about the intersection of faith and mental health are trying to encourage is an integrated view of both the faith and the body, the mind, body, soul. Right? And getting us to see ourselves as whole human beings, that God created us mind, body, and soul. We focus so much on the soul, we negate the mind and body, but God created all of these parts of us. Yeah. He is aware of all these parts of us. Right. And so it's up to us to bring ourselves into the awareness of all of the parts that make us human. And that can be interacting with things like our mental health, which can affect our faith.
Yeah, that's so good. And I had to be careful myself not to get caught in that, because when I came to Jesus, I came to him with depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, panic, all kinds of anxiety, panic disorder. I don't even remember all the names that they had diagnosed me with that I was genuinely struggling with. And when I came to Jesus, that was one of the things that he healed me of very quickly. But we have to remember, like, Christians, I'm not speaking this out on anyone, but Christians get cancer, Christians get sick in the same way that you
Exactly.
can get sick in your physical body, you can get sick in your mental health as well. I was going
Sure.
on a prayer walk in like January, and I felt so strongly that there were so many Christians, and not just like new believers, but leaders and pastors that were getting attacked with depression. And I kept telling my husband, like, I just feel this so strongly. And then I had a bunch of leaders calling me, asking me for prayer for depression, because that's how they were getting attacked. And so I want to know, how can we prevent depression from creeping on when it's not maybe something that's like our everyday battle, but there may be seasons of it? And if it does creep in, how can we combat it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, especially when you're talking about leaders and faith leaders, I mean, that has its own kind of unique factors as far as how we elevate leaders while also isolating them and them being placed on a platform and not having systems of support themselves.
That's so good.
That's a whole other conversation, right? But that's the first thing, is making sure that we have systems of support and we are creating cultures where it is safe to be open and to talk about these things.
Yeah.
That just by having this podcast, that's what you're doing. You're saying the culture of our podcast is that these are things that we talk about, but those cultures only exist if we are speaking into those things and opening up the space for it. So that's a really big deal, especially in the church, even if it's just bringing it up in a sermon or bringing it up in a small group, like just setting the tone of the culture that these are things that we talk about openly here, and you're not going to be shamed. Now, when it comes to depression, again, there are many factors. Sometimes a person is more at risk or more vulnerable to develop depression because it runs through their family. That is something that is outside of their will.
Wow.
Sometimes it's because, they found in the brain that when certain people, especially have like ongoing chronic depression, they lack the neurochemical serotonin in the brain. That is something that is beyond their willpower. And when someone is given antidepressants, it's actually to make that serotonin more available in the synaptic gap in the brain so that it can help regulate their mood in a way that maybe their body is not doing for them. Just in the same way that you would do if you had a heart issue or diabetes or anything like that. Your body's not producing the way that it should. And so it's causing some of these complications. So I put that out there just to reduce stigma and shame, that depression isn't just someone just having a pity party or like someone's just being sad or they're being dramatic. It's like, no, there are real symptoms in their body. Sometimes it's hard just listing off the symptoms. You might notice that it's just really hard for them to do typical daily things like showering, just typical hygiene things. You often see something called the depression mess, where like the room is just a mess. There's food everywhere. There's clothes everywhere. It's like they just didn't have the energy or wherewithal to be able to do anything, because it literally feels like you're moving through jello, feeling lethargic, feeling hopeless, losing a loss of interest in the things that you're typically interested in, right? Like you usually like to go out, you usually like to hang with your friends, or you usually like to write, or you usually like to do these things. And you notice they just have they're numb, they're apathetic to the world. They just have no motivation. And most of all, recognizing the difference between sadness and depression. Sadness is a universal human emotion. It's something that we all feel and experience when we've experienced disappointment or loss in our lives, but we usually can like work ourselves back after a while, after a couple weeks, we're okay. Depression is like going on for maybe 6 weeks, months, and it's not changing unless there's some type of therapeutic treatment that's actually addressing it. It's persistent.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference there. So recognizing the difference between sadness and depression. And I say all that to go back to say, if you are seeing this in someone else, right? Or if you are recognizing symptoms in yourself, sometimes we normalize it because it's been our reality, like, oh, they're just going through this, or this is my life. And it's like, no, if it's persistent or it's getting worse, or you're not able to function, you're not able to work, you're not able to maintain your relationships, you're not able to function through life, that's really serious. And it's typically time to seek more help, because there might be some things at play that we're just not realizing that might be the cause for why we're experiencing that. So speaking out to others, if you notice, hey, you can sometimes just, if you know someone, it's kind of like, hey, I noticed that you typically do these things, or you typically love to do this, and are you okay? Like, is everything okay? And knowing the signs in yourself of mental decline, like what are some of the signs for you that you notice when you do these things? It's a sign that your mental health is declining.
That's actually really good.
So seeing it, being willing to speak into it.
You know what I picked up too, Britt? You talked about community, and I like that, because I feel as if when you're struggling with depression, you're struggling with anxiety, sometimes we want to go in our cave, right? We just, like, when you're depressed, you just want to isolate from everybody. But the reality is, especially for me, because I still at times deal with anxiety, but for me, I like to open up and talk to somebody about it. I have like safe people that I can just open up and really just throw up on them. And I hate to say that word, but I feel this type of way, blah, blah, blah. But I think if we don't create that safe community or that safe environment, then people aren't going to open up. They're going to regress. They're going to go into their hole, and they're not going to speak up and talk. So I just think too, even just us, like you talking, maybe as church, as a community, we need to learn to be a safe place. And I just think too, the struggle with that is all of us are on a journey to go somewhere, right? We have so many things on our schedule, this, that. But us learning to be able to sit there and be able to talk to somebody and
be
ask,
the good Samaritan.
like, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, when I think about Elijah, the Bible says that Elijah wanted to die. He was over it.
That's
like,
so good.
Right.
And
like,
he
"Kill
was
me
a
now."
prophet,
He
mighty
killed
man
it.
of God.
He's just like, kill me now. And
Yeah.
the angel's like, be quiet, bro. You need some food. Let's talk this
Yeah.
out. And you need to go to sleep. But
that's so good.
just having those conversations bring life. Britt, I have a question to ask you. So growing up, I don't know if both Brits, I don't know if any of you guys ever just realized this, but I don't know, growing up, anxiety wasn't a prevalent word. It wasn't even a relevant word. When I don't even remember even battling or struggling with anxiety just growing up, and just even with my friends. But nowadays, it just feels like anxiety is common. Everywhere we look, where we go,
so
you're
true.
on Instagram. Oh, battling with anxiety. I go on the Bible app. I see wonderful Brit doing a dope Devo on there. I see Bible app anxiety plans, just a section for anxiety. Brit, my question for you is, what do you think caused the increase of anxiety? What shifted from maybe 15 years ago to now, where people are anxious more than ever, right? And they're trying to find a way out. What do you think increased that?
It's a great question.
That is a really great question. We can only kind of speculate, right? Some of those things. And this was what the introduction of my thesis was around. And what I found was that, statistically, anxiety is actually the number one mental health condition, not only in the US, but also in the world.
Wow.
So out of all the mental health conditions, it's one of the most prevalent. There are a number of reasons for it. One, we could say maybe anxiety was always a thing. It's always been a part of the human experience. God in scripture is always like, do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. And I'm saying, like, when God says that, I don't believe it's a condemnation of him saying like, you better not fear. It's more of him reassuring humanity over and over throughout scripture, because he knows that anxiety is a part of the human experience in the things that we're encountering in life.
Right.
So it could be that it's always been a part of the human experience, but now we have more language around it. Now it's less stigmatized. So now we're talking about it more. There could be that aspect.
Yeah.
And because of, like you mentioned, social media, we didn't have social media years ago. So now you see the conversation being more prevalent.
Mhm.
So it could be that it's always been around and we're talking about it more. It also could be our diets. I know that we've personally talked about mental health and the gut brain connection.
Man,
we
I'm
have
working on it right now.
Yep.
as we talk.
I got him eating a cleaner diet as of like
Yes.
3 days ago.
Straight up, man.
Yes, go Richard. So yeah, I mean, we think about it, like we have so much sugar in our diet, right? If it's not sugar, it's glucose and fructose and corn syrup. So we have more sugar in our diets. Also, we are indoors a lot more and we're sedentary, and being outside, getting sunlight that gives you that vitamin D, that gives you a boost in serotonin, right? Like we're not outdoors as much. We are confined to our phones more. You mentioned community. We're having these parasocial relationships where we're online seeing people and comparing our lives and constantly feeling behind and not enough, instead of turning toward maybe real in-person authentic community. We have these influencers sometimes who I've spoken to and heard about where they're big online and shooting things from their home on their screen, but they have severe social anxiety. They can't leave the house, because there's more going on. So, and then we have the world events, right? But there's always been world events happening, that's not anything new. But then we have the news in social media that's just constantly doom and gloom, and we're exacerbated with bad news all the time online that's keeping us anxious. So there's a lot of factors that could be why anxiety feels heightened in this generation. And as we're progressing, we usually can't say the cause, but we can speculate like these things collectively are potentially making us more anxious as a society.
So good.
No, I absolutely agree. And what would you say to somebody like, because I used to, man, when I get panic attacks, I would like try to find a source to calm me down.
Mhm.
But say if there's someone listening right now and they're struggling with anxiety and they're going to a point of panic attack, how could we help somebody in that moment of panic? Because when that moment of panic comes, I kid you not, like there's moments where I just break down and I'll just like cry and like, God help me, like what's going on? Like, what would you say to somebody right now who might be struggling in that moment? Like, what is some practical ways to help them and get them through that situation?
Panic attacks are real and they're more common than I think people realize. I mean, I've had friends who I've spoken to, right? Like I've had friends who I've spoken to who are believers, and they call me, hey, like last night I felt like I was having a heart attack. My mind was racing. I couldn't sleep. And I'm like, girl, you had a panic attack. And it's so validating to just be able to name like, that's what that was. And it's a real thing that happens in our body that sometimes is out of our control. And so, with panic attacks, basically your body is going into that fight or flight response. It's kind of being hijacked. And sometimes it's triggered by something specific. And I know sometimes it feels like it came out of nowhere. Panic attacks usually peak at around 10 minutes. So on average. So it can feel like forever when you're in a panic attack. It feels like forever. But something I like to remind people is that panic attacks do have an end. They do peak and come to an end. It will not last forever. It will come down. Your body is wired. Yeah, I want to just reaffirm people. Your body is wired to come back down from a panic attack. And just because sometimes the panic is around the panic of having the panic attack, right? And it's
that's very real. I've seen a lot of people that are afraid to leave the house because they're afraid to get a panic attack.
Hey, that used to be me.
But I'm not just referring to you. I'm not trying to, I'm not taking jabs. I mean, I've met several people that, no, yeah, you've been there. Yeah, but not just you.
Yes. And that's actually how phobias are created, through avoidance behaviors, where you have a fear associated with something. So now you stay away from it, or you only stay indoors, or you won't drive on the freeway, or you won't go outdoors. You won't go to an event because you're afraid you'll have a panic attack. Now it's creating a phobia. Your avoidance of these places and things are developing, right? So something that we understand is that avoidance behaviors, while they feel safe, in the long run, they don't help you progress. And this is where working with a professional, this is where working with a professional is very important, because they are trained to help you unroot some of those fears, to have the coping skills through panic attacks, to reground with your senses, to learn how to, in the moment, kind of let it almost ride like a wave instead of fighting it. Just seeing it as a wave. It's coming, and it's going to come, and it's going to go, and I'm going to find ways to ground myself through this. You guys may have heard like the 5-finger thing, get in touch with 5 things that you see, list 4 things that you feel, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing you can taste, or sometimes people use essential oils, or they splash some water on their face, something that's going to ground them. Ice cube, right.
Ice cube.
Hold on to an ice cube if you're going through a panic attack.
I do that, and I pray. I'm like, Lord help me.
He's like, it's Jesus in this ice.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
hold
so
on
funny.
to Jesus in that ice,
Yeah. What I found to be beneficial too, like because I'll have anxiety creep on in high moments of like feeling overwhelmed, or I have too much on my to-do list and not enough time, or my child's throwing a tantrum. And I'm trying to, and I have 5 million things to do. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get all this done? Is like instantly trying to cast thoughts down, or even taking a moment of pause, even if you feel like you don't have a moment of pause. Because if you keep trying to fight through in your current circumstance that's chaotic, it's gonna become a panic attack. And so whether it's like, maybe there's a negative thought about whether it's your health or you don't have enough time, like you have to start rebuking those thoughts instantly and casting them down instantly, and focusing on things that are noble, praiseworthy, and true, and playing worship music. Like these things have been helpful for me to prevent going into a full-blown panic attack. Because if I keep staying in that chaotic situation, or I keep focusing on that thought, it'll become a panic attack for me. I'm not immune. I mean, Jesus healed me, but I'm not immune. I'm still an imperfect human being. So taking those moments to like going, okay, like praying even for discernment over your thoughts, and asking the Lord to show you which thoughts are from him versus which are not. And then casting all those thoughts down that are not. Like that's just been what's been helpful and beneficial in my life. And I recently discovered the ice cubes, which are very nice too.
Yeah. Can I say, like, from a neurobiological perspective, when you are triggered by fear or anxiety or overwhelm, literally the fear response of your brain, the amygdala, is hijacking the rest of your brain. Your frontal lobes, your prefrontal cortex, that's responsible for your thinking, judgment, planning, the things that kind of help you think rationally. Literally, when your brain is what we call an amygdala hijacking, it's hijacked by that fear response. It kind of like incapacitates that frontal lobe, because all it's focused on is survival. It's like, we just need to survive this situation in this moment. And so sometimes, like what you're saying, Britt, is being able to pause, being able to pray, give yourself a day and all of that. What you're doing is you're allowing time for that fear response, like literally your body's physical fear response, to subside, your frontal lobes to kind of turn back on so you can start processing. Because like you said, if your brain is hijacked by fear, you're now seeing things from a place of fear. You're interpreting things from a place of anxiety. You're translating things that's going on around you from the perspective of anxiety.
That's
So that's not going to be productive. So you really do need to take that space and time for that to de-escalate so that you can start, even if it's, you said community, even if it's reaching out to someone to have someone help speak truth back into you when you just can't see it yourself right now, you know, or reading scripture or prayer and meditating on the word, like all of these things practically are helping you kind of de-escalate that response so you can approach things from a clearer space. So absolutely.
I love that. I actually just watched this documentary that said when mothers give birth, that a new part of their brain in the amygdala, I don't know all the terminology, but basically it opens up, right? And so as you're sharing about that, I'm like, that makes sense why new mothers have so many new fears, so many new anxieties. And so that's a normal thing, mothers. Like I'm always
anxiety is real.
Yes, like it's real because it's something that's going on in your brain that's been opening up. So anyways, okay, Britt, we're going to start wrapping it up here, but I want to know, I know you have a new book coming out in June. Can you please tell our audience about your book?
First of all, I love you guys so much. Like the first time I met you, it was like, okay, Britt is like my sister from another mister. I already know, and I love you, Richard. So thank you guys so much and for opening up this conversation. So yeah, my book is with Dayspring. It's releasing June 26th, and it's called Worthy: 50 Mindful Moments to Bring Peace and Clarity to Your Day. So it's kind of it's like a daily devotional speaking to the things we're talking about here. It's just a short, I think life is overwhelming enough. Our brains are overloaded. So I just created a short devotional for each day with truths and reminders to speak to, you know, anxiety and all the things. It has a daily mental health tracker where you can track your mental health, your mood, your sleep, all of that. And it has an affirmation for each day. And the whole thing encompasses coming from a faith-based perspective that is also integrating psychology and psychological tips to help practically work through it. So I'm so excited about it. I hope you guys enjoy it. It was a labor of love. And then I have the Faith and Mental Wellness podcast, which is, if you like enjoyed this conversation, guys, that's exactly the conversations we're having with both mental health professionals, ministers, pastors, faith leaders, researchers, psychologists, therapists, most of who are believers. And we're having the conversation at the intersection of faith and mental health.
That's what it's called, Faith and Mental Health. That's how people can look up.
Yeah.
Okay. Faith and Mental Wellness. Okay. Make sure you look up her podcast. And where can people get connected with you? I know you have a website and some social media, so share that with our audience.
Yes, we have all the things. I have my website, BrittneyMoses.com. That will probably kind of link you to everything. And then I'm on Instagram, Brittney Moses, and I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Pinterest. Just come on through, and I always love making new friends.
So awesome. Well, Brittney, thank you so much for being on our show today. We're so grateful. And thank you everyone for tuning into the Let's Talk Purity podcast.